Hello, and welcome back to History with Mr. Roberts. We're going to go back to the 10th of May, 1940. And as you can see from this newspaper, Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, and soon France are going to be invaded by Nazi forces. Now, the main question that this video is going to answer is how did France collapse so quickly? We have to remember France was Europe's largest army, and Churchill himself said it was the only thing that guaranteed European security. But how did France succumb to Hitler in less than 6 weeks? Now, this video is going to answer those questions. We're going to look at lots of the debates. Lots of historians blame several things. Was it French and British tactics? Was it their failure to see what Germany was planning? Was it German tactics that were the reason? Other historians blame France's faltering economy, its divided politics. But what were the real reasons as to why Hitler was able to conquer France so quickly? This video is going to help you find out. Let's jump straight in. Now, Hitler and his generals had been planning Case Yellow, the operation against the Western powers, for quite a while. And you'll see here Hitler looking at the maps for the French, Belgian, Luxembourg and Dutch invasion. Now, he's here with his generals. Now, they've been working on different plans. Now, of course, the Schiffen plan was the traditional plan the Germans had used back in 1914, where German forces went through Belgium. But for this operation called Plan Yellow, Hitler believed it was not ambitious enough. Now, unfortunately for the Nazis, on the 10th of January 1940, a German plane had crashed in Belgium. Now, this German plane had the invasion plans for what the Germans were planning. So, of course, the Germans had to replan, and this is where General Erich von Manstein, he comes up with a new, more ambitious plan, and he convinces Hitler to go through the Ardennes forest. Now, the Ardennes is very hilly, very forested, not somewhere that the French and British would expect a German invasion. And so it was on the early hours of the 10th of May, Hitler issues a proclamation. Now, this is read out by his generals to all the soldiers on the Western Front. And he reads, "The battle which begins today will decide the fate of the German nation for the next 1,000 years. Now do your duty. The German people give you their blessing." Now, of course, the first attacks begin on Belgium and the Netherlands. The attack on the Netherlands in particular is a total shock. Now, there had been warnings from the Dutch embassy in Berlin, but because the invasion had kept on being delayed, a lot of those warnings were not heeded. Now, all of a sudden, the Germans start bombing airfields across the Netherlands and Belgium. And this is where the Army Group A under Rundstedt goes through the Ardennes forest. Now, as I mentioned, the Ardennes is very forested, lots of windy roads, not the sort of place that you would put armoured divisions to go through and across the frontier. Now, what ended up happening is the traffic jams are enormous. Now, some of these traffic jams of tanks and armoured personnel carriers going through the Ardennes stretch for over 400 kilometres. Now, this is the first mistake the Allies make, and this is one of the biggest reasons for the fall of France. Because most of the French and British bombers and fighter planes are in the north expecting the invasion through Belgium and France, they ignore the Ardennes forest. Now, had those bombers been over the Ardennes, they could easily have destroyed the German onslaught because the tanks, the armoured vehicles would have been stuck in traffic jams. Now, as it is, German planes fly up and down the lines to try and release these bottlenecks and to improve logistics. Now, let's take a look at what happens once the Germans break through.
Die Panzer gehen zum Angriff vor. Das feindliche Widerstandsnetz muss ausgeräuchert werden.
Now, as the Germans break through, they perform a sickle cut maneuver and they come behind the back of the Allies. Now, at this point, the German forces advance towards the Channel ports. Let's take a look.
Die Maschinen kippen ab und greifen an. Genau stößt der Stuka ins Ziel. Abwurf! Sofort wird die Maschine wieder hochgezogen.
Now, with German forces advancing towards the coast, the British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, together with their French and Polish allies, are trapped in the Dunkirk pocket. There's also some troops trapped in Calais and Boulogne. Now, of course, the Royal Navy, as you can see here, picture of these small boat icons, is absolutely vast. So 800 to 700 ships, and including small boats, make their way across to Dunkirk to rescue as many British troops as possible. Now, the German planes fly over, dropping thousands of these leaflets. And the leaflets are very clear in their message. They're basically telling the Allies the game is up. Now, the French version is slightly different and tells the French soldiers that their leaders have flown away and abandoned them. Now, the most important thing about Dunkirk is Hitler's halt order. How did he allow the British and French troops to escape? Now, to learn more about that, click on that video just in the top right. But if we go back to Dunkirk, the devastation is incredible. So from the jaws of defeat, the British and the French have managed to escape with 340,000 troops, but they have left behind enormous amounts of equipment. They've lost over 68,000 troops killed or taken prisoner. They have left an awful lot of tanks behind, over 160,000 tons of petrol. And as you can see from these photos, the very upsetting cost of what it meant for the evacuation at Dunkirk. So on the 15th of May 1940, French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud calls Churchill in Downing Street and tells him, "We have been defeated." Now, Churchill is totally shocked by this, totally unexpected, and he flies to France the very next day and he meets Maurice Gamelin, who's the French army commander. Now, Gamelin tells him there is no point in a counterattack and that the war is effectively lost. Now, it's here that the recriminations between the Allies begin. Now, up to this point, French and British planning has been absolutely appalling. They did not see the Germans coming through the Ardennes. There was lots of disagreements even before the battle in the West about what to do about Norway. Should they invade Finland? Should they invade the Caucasus? British and French planning and coordination was all over the place. Now, at this point, the French are bitterly angry with the British and they start to feel that they cannot trust the British. And this old idea of British perfidy starts to feed into the French command. Now, of course, in Dunkirk, the French have been pleading for the British to take more of their troops and for the British to launch more RAF attacks. But the British hold back the RAF in defence of the British Isles. Now, of course, with these recriminations going back and forth, things are absolutely desperate for the Allies. And this is one of the key reasons why France fell so quickly. The coordination between the Allies just was not strong enough. Now, as June progressed, German forces continued to move south as part of Case Red. Now, we can see here the German onslaught as it heads towards other Channel ports and down into central France. Now, on the 10th of June, the French government declared Paris an open city, and they do this to try and spare Paris from German bombing. Now, throughout this period, the French government, the French civil service are busy burning documents in Paris to stop them falling into German hands. Now, the Allies in the north have already started evacuating. So in Operation Dynamo in Dunkirk, as we've already seen. Then we have Operation Cycle from northern France, the likes of Le Havre, between the 10th and 13th of June. And then we have evacuations in the western half of France on 15th to the 22nd of June from the likes of Saint-Malo, Cherbourg, Brest, and Saint-Nazaire. Now, of course, at this point, the French cabinet have tried to escape Paris. They are making their way across central France. Now, part of the problem is there are 6 to 8 million refugees on the road also trying to escape the German advance. Now, the problem is that the cabinet can't find a single place to meet. Outside Paris, communications is very sketchy. Members of the cabinet arrive at different chateaux and find that their colleagues are not there. Eventually, on the 12th of June, they meet for the first time in Tours. Now, it's in Tours that they discuss the potential idea of an armistice. This is the first time that Maxime Weygand talks about the need for an armistice. He also points out there's no point retreating to Britain because soon Britain will also be defeated. Now, it's on the 16th to the 17th of June that the cabinet meets again in Bordeaux. So they've pushed even further south. They meet in Bordeaux. This is where the Prime Minister resigns and where Marshal Petain becomes the leader of the French nation. And it's there that Petain decides to seek an armistice with the Germans. Now it's the 22nd of June 1940, and Hitler makes the French finally sign the terms of armistice. And as you can see from this newspaper on the 22nd of June 1940, Hitler has been vindictive in the extreme. He only meets the French generals for less than 10 minutes before handing over to Göring and Ribbentrop to make the French read and sign the terms of the armistice. Now, let's just find out what that experience was like for the French and just how vindictive Hitler was. Let's take a look. So the meeting for the armistice took place in a forest clearing in Compiègne, just outside Paris. Now you'll see here, there's a museum in the distance, and this site was critical to Hitler and what he wanted to do to embarrass the French. Now on the 11th of November 1918, when Germany had been defeated in World War I, the Germans were forced to attend a meeting here to sign the armistice after World War I in a railway carriage. Now, after the defeat of France in 1940, Hitler was vindictive in the extreme, and he ordered his soldiers to smash into the museum, to wheel out the exact same train carriage, and to force the French to sign the terms of the armistice in the exact same railway carriage. Now, this footage taken by German cameramen on the day just show how spectacular the event was designed to celebrate Hitler's defeat of France. Now, we have to remember, for the Germans, it was a huge victory. They'd only lost 50,000 troops in a 6-week campaign. Now, the campaign had done several things. It had knocked France out of the war. It left Britain alone. But more importantly, it silenced some of those generals who were wary and worried about the direction Hitler was taking the Third Reich. Now we can see here Hitler approaching the carriage. He's there with Göring walking up. Now, as he enters the carriage, he sits in the exact same seat that Marshal Foch sat in 1918. Now, Marshal Foch was a leader of the French army in 1918. So he sits in the same seat. Now, he only stays for 10 minutes, arriving at 3:30 and leaving at 3:40. He then hands over to Hess, Göring and Ribbentrop to read the terms of armistice to the French and to make them sign. Now, even as German soldiers were walking through Paris in celebration, people were trying to work out what had caused France's sudden defeat. Now, even today, historians still go over this, and we've looked at several reasons, including German tactics and poor planning of the British and the French. But what other reasons do historians sometimes attribute to explaining the reason why Hitler was able to walk around like this in Paris? Now, a lot of historians look back to the First World War and the sheer destruction it caused for France. France had lost 1.4 million men. It had over 1 million injured and disabled. Now, the impact of World War I on France was catastrophic. The birth rate plunged through the floor, and also huge swathes of northern France were severely damaged by the conflict. Now, this leads a lot of historians to deduce that because what France suffered, it meant that France became very, very defensive. It looked at ways to prevent war. It was a huge growth in pacifism and anti-war movements, and a lot of people attribute that to the reasons why France was unable to put up a strong and robust fight against Hitler in 1940. Now, a lot of historians will say that France lost because it had a defensive mentality. In other words, it was obsessed with defense rather than offense. Now, a lot of historians will point out that in 1932, the Ministry of War became the Ministry of Defence, and that signifies the change in strategy. Now, you'll see here from the map, the French built the Maginot Line. Now, this was a huge set of fortifications between the French and German borders. Now, it started in 1930, and it was finished around 1935, 1937. Now, it was a huge set of fortifications that ran along the border, and it faced the Siegfried Line, or Germany's west wall. Now, it was a set of tank fortifications, barbed wire, tank traps, but it also had an awful lot of fortifications that were based underground. A lot of the troops could be based in casements underground. Now, these casements could fire at each other in case one was captured. Now, the Maginot Line was well ahead of its time. It had cinemas, it had railways, it had booby traps, and it also had huge underground storage units and its own power system. Now, my view is that this was not actually a problem and does not explain the reason why France collapsed. If you look at the population of France, it was falling during this time. So it made a lot of sense for the French to build the Maginot Line facing the German border so that they could redeploy the troops elsewhere. And we have to also remember that the Maginot Line was actually successful. The Germans did not attack against the Maginot Line. The problem for the French was that it did not go the whole way to the Belgian coast. Now, a lot of historians will blame the Great Depression and its impact on France. Now, the Great Wall Street crash happened in 1929 and it swept the world, pushing the globe into recession. Now, of course, the Great Depression affected France less severely than it did, for example, in Britain or the United States or in Germany. But the recovery took a lot longer. Now, France didn't recover until 1939. Unemployment was very high. There were also fewer people working, therefore spending. It meant the government couldn't raise enough taxes. They had to cut government expenditure. And also foreign trade was in really, really bad shape. There was also rising debt and there was a lot of capital fleeing the country. Now, France also struggled with exports because of the price of its currency. So all of these problems were economic, really fed into causing a lot of division inside France. Now, these divisions in France are rife all through the 1930s, and we see here an image of the riots on the 6th of February 1934 as part of the Stavisky affair. Now, the affair was largely about government corruption, but it epitomised the problem of France. Here we see lots of rightists, lots of anti-government, anti-parliamentary, pro-fascist protesters taking to the streets. Now, in 1936, a Jewish Prime Minister comes to power. Léon Blum leads a left-wing coalition called the Front Populaire. Now, they come to power in a landslide with a big majority, and they implement a lot of reforms. But the right fight back ruthlessly, and it means that eventually Léon Blum has to abandon a lot of his campaign promises. Now, one of the biggest problems that France faces in the 1930s is the Spanish Civil War. Now, the government is heavily divided. There are some on the left who want to get involved, who want to help the forces who are fighting back against Franco. And there are those on the right that look to Franco and look to what's happening in Spain as an opportunity for what France could achieve. Now, this is where France is bitterly divided. You have one part of France who wants to maintain democracy, wants to move its politics to the left, and you have the other half of France who wants to embrace fascism or fascism in a French way. Now, of course, debates over the Spanish Civil War go on and on. The Germans and the Italians get stuck in, but France and Britain stay on the sidelines. Now, even just this foreign policy decision shows how bitterly divided France is. The French leadership really struggled to make any decisions. And this also happens with armament. There's a lot of debates inside the government about armament. Eventually, the Prime Minister, Léon Blum, wins through, but it just goes to show the problems that were happening inside France's political elite. Now, even as France has been defeated, the government was still heavily divided. Now, we see here a video of Marshal Petain later in the 1940s. He's now in control of Vichy France. But when he was actually in the discussions around the armistice, the government and the cabinet were bitterly divided about what direction France should take. There were generals who were saying, and advisors that were saying to Petain that they should flee to Britain, flee to North Africa, or go to other parts of the empire and continue the fight. And there were others that were saying we should get into bed with Germany and form part of the new European order. So one of the key reasons why France lost the war was basically down to internal division. It was divided all through the 1930s. Even in its last days during its defeat, it still could not agree a way forward. And as we'll see in a later video, even during the period of Vichy, French divisions were rife. Okay, so let's just recap what we've learned in this video. So Hitler invaded Holland, Belgium and France and Luxembourg on the 10th of May 1940 in an operation called Case Yellow. Now the invasion of the rest of France was called Case Red. Now the German army invaded through the Ardennes forest. Now this surprised the Allies. It was heavily forested and very hilly. Now the Allied forces, including the British Expeditionary Force, had to evacuate from Dunkirk. Now this is the famous Operation Dynamo. Now German forces then launched Case Red and they move into the rest of France. Now during this, there's total chaos. There are 6 to 8 million refugees on the roads, and the French government keep on trying to meet each other in various chateaux across France. Now they eventually meet in Bordeaux, and it's there that they decide to seek an armistice with Germany. Now France is forced to sign the armistice on the 22nd of June 1940 in that railway carriage in Compagnie. Now, of course, historians disagree on what caused France's sudden defeat, and it did shock the entire world. Now, of course, some blame France's defensive posture, saying that after the First World War, France was shocked into wanting to move away from the idea of offensive warfare and to stand behind the Maginot Line. Now, a lot of people say the Maginot Line is a concrete example of France's weakness. As we've seen, others blame France's failing economy, its falling population, its polarised political atmosphere, and also the fact that it really failed in diplomacy to build a set of allies, especially on Germany's eastern flank. But overall, the biggest reason was a combination of these factors, but the most important was the failure of the Allies to work out Germany's military planning and to coordinate an effective response to it. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed today's video on the fall of France, and hopefully this video has given you those answers that you were looking for. Now, of course, as always, I'll include a reading list just below the video. There are some cracking books on the fall of France. One of my favourites is Julian Jackson, and this is The Fall of France, the Nazi Invasion of 1940. It is fantastic. Also, Ian Abbasi, this is a really great book about the occupation. Now, I'll also include a list of some really old books. This book, The Twilight of France, was published in 1942. So it'll be interesting for you to read how things have changed in terms of how historians look at the Battle of France. And I'll also include one of my favourite books of all time, The Taxis on the Marne. Now, this is written by someone who experienced the fall of France, and you really get a sense for how some soldiers felt when France was defeated. But like as always, a big thank you to everyone who subscribed. If you like the video, please tell more people. It really helps. Now, the next video will be the Battle of Britain. How did Britain survive when we seemed so close to defeat? Okay, see you next time.